Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bill Rabinowitz Substack podcast. We're here to discuss this week's game against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I'm joined by Andy Greder, Golden Gophers beat writer for the Pioneer Press in St. Paul. Thank you for joining me, Andy. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on, Bill.
Sure, sure. How long have you covered the Gophers?
Oh man, this will be my 11th season. I started in 2015, which would have been the last year of Jerry Kill before he had to step down mid-season for health issues. And then there was 1 year of Tracy Claeys and going on 9 years. This is the ninth year. So I guess this makes it 11. It adds up pretty quickly. So this is
Yeah.
the ninth year for PJ.
Okay. Um, I mean, he's been there a while now. I mean, does it seem weird that he's been there that long?
Yes and no. I think when he came in, he was at Central Michigan for a few years. So I think, what did he have, like a 5 year contract at the start? So to have him, more than double what his initial contract was, I think is kind of, interesting and surprising because his name always kind of comes up for how he has the Gophers kind of punching above their weight. So his name always kind of comes up. So there's always kind of a little bit of a rumor or flirtation or contract offer at certain times. So I guess there is a certain level of surprise that he's still here.
Okay. How would you describe and how would people there describe the job he's done and how Gopher fans view him?
Yeah, I think, they look back at what 2019 was when they went 11-2 and beat a top five team in Penn State and went to the Outback Bowl and beat Auburn. I think they were thrilled the fact that they were able to have a top 10 season here at Minnesota was a thrill for everybody. And to kind of do it as early as they did in PJ's third year, I think that kind of raised the expectations of what could be possible here. They haven't reached that height in the years since. They got a couple of 9-win seasons. When the window was open in the Big Ten West, they weren't able to jump through it a couple of times. So they've had some good seasons. Obviously, historically, it's kind of a downtrodden program. So to have winning seasons, to have a couple 9-win years and win six straight bowl games, I think people are content with that or enjoy that. But I think they're always kind of looking for another, kind of double-digit win season.
Right. The row the boat thing. That's what he's known for. How much of it at this point do people kind of roll their eyes about it, or is it considered, well, this is their philosophy and nobody bats an eye?
Yeah, I think people are pretty accepting of it now. I think it's something that is pretty constant even in year nine. It's something that there was obviously a tragic school shooting here a couple of weeks ago, and a bunch of players went and volunteered at that school for kind of a fall fest kind of thing. So it's something that they're very active. Row the boat kind of means, never give up and always kind of be giving back to the community. And they still do that to this day. Obviously, that was such a tragic thing in this community, and they were a part of kind of helping the community rebuild after that. So it's something that's constant in the way they go about things.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, these things just happen all the time now, and
Yeah.
you become numb to it, and obviously you shouldn't. It's just tragic. Is PJ always on? I mean, he seems to be always, hyper caffeinated.
Yeah, he is. He's always that way. I've covered him, like we said, for almost 9 full seasons now, and he always kind of has that high energy way about him. And I think he always kind of a little guarded on how much caffeine he actually has. He kind of acts as if it's natural, but I know he likes to, have some energy drinks and some coffee. So I don't think it's always fully natural, but that's kind of the way he is, you kind of come to expect it.
Okay. Let's talk about this year's team. 3-1 with wins over Buffalo and Northwestern State, not Northwestern State, and a close one last week against Rutgers, and a 27-14 loss to Cal. How would you describe kind of this Minnesota team?
Yeah, kind of when you asked about kind of the heights of the program and kind of the expectations for the fan base, I think there's always a ceiling that they hit, right? I think when you look back at the loss against Cal, a lot of it was self-inflicted errors, right? Corey Parrish, their star safety, who the Buckeyes were in on a couple of years ago, he muffs a punt inside the 5 yard line in a field goal game, and Cal comes in and scores 2 plays later and kind of puts the game away. And that was looked at as one of many mistakes that they had in that game and really kind of kicked away a winnable game, especially when Cal goes on and gets blanked. What was it, 34-0 by San Diego State the following week? It kind of it's looked at as a game that slipped away from them. And I think that's kind of if they're in this spot, if they win that Cal game and they PJ gets a win over his mentor in Greg Schiano, and obviously a guy that has connections to Ohio State as well. I think it's a different vibe around the team. So I think it's one where it's kind of missed opportunities.
Okay. What were the expectations for this season?
Yeah, I think internally, Vegas had him at like 6.5 as kind of a win loss margin over under,
Yeah.
and internally, PJ went to Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas, and he was talking about having a path to the college football playoff. And that kind of got a lot of people's attention because any sort of talk of outside expectations in his first 8 years, he would always kind of dismiss and elbow out of the way and talk about kind of one game at a time and all the kind of coaching cliches. So for him to kind of be as vocal as he was and kind of believing in his team that they could reach those kind of heights and using Indiana as an example of what they did last year really caught a lot of people's attention. And kind of just to have the Cal game going back to that and kind of the letdown that was kind of really took off any sort of opportunity for that.
Okay. Yeah. So through 4 games, I mean, 3-1 isn't bad, obviously, but the three you figured you'd beat Buffalo and obviously Northwestern State. Rutgers maybe, and Cal maybe. So I guess maybe they are where they should be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think given the fact that the talent level of this team, I think 3-1 is a fair spot to be in.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the key players. Start with quarterback Drake Lindsey. Like Julian's saying, he's a redshirt freshman. His stats is 65%, 65.9% completion percentage, 7 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. That's pretty solid. I mean, how's he played?
Yeah, I think he's been great for them. I think especially when they fell down 14-0 to Rutgers and kind of were in a huge hole early on. It looked like it could be a blowout against them, and they threw a 79-yard bomb to another redshirt freshman wide receiver from nearby Mankato, and kind of really flipped the script and kind of were able to turn things on. And it was really all about what Drake was able to do with his arm. They had a real difficult time running the ball against Rutgers. So it was really Drake Lindsey throwing for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over. I think he's been very precocious in the way he's gone about it. They run an NFL style offense where he goes to the line of scrimmage with multiple checks and alerts and different things. And he's really tasked with getting them in the right position and spot to run a play. And they had a check. It was a 4-yard touchdown. I kind of traveled at 2 yards in the air late in the game, and it was a check that was put in on Friday, and they had off coverage, and he was able to assess that and get on the same page as the wide receiver. And I think it showed a real ability to play the position at a young age.
That's a lot for him to handle this week against Ohio State's defense and Matt Patricia, who's obviously an NFL coordinator and will probably do everything he can to throw the book at an 18, 19-year-old kid. How ready do you think he is for that challenge?
We'll see. I think it's interesting because he looks at it as a great opportunity, but obviously it's not going to be like anything he's seen before, right? I think there's disguises on what they do pre-snap and what they come out in afterwards, and what are the 11 different spot Caleb Downs is going to be in, all of these kinds of things, right? I think they say they know what they're getting themselves into, but I don't think they fully know, obviously, because of how dynamite and how stout the defense has been for the Buckeyes. I think they want to try to act like they're ready, but I don't think they'll know until the lights come on in the horseshoe.
I think I saw the PJ quote about, Washington exceeded the average, right? They scored 6. Ohio State's averaging 5 point, whatever it is. Yeah. So he's got a sense of humor about it.
Yeah, no doubt. I think he knows what he's getting himself into with this. I thought it was interesting. Greg Harbaugh, their offensive coordinator, they had a top 5 team in Penn State come in to Minneapolis last year, and it came right down to the wire in that one. And they kind of look at it like, yeah, we know that they're a great team, but Greg Harbaugh talked about that Penn State game a number of times today of, yeah, we understand, we respect them, we think they're a great team, but hey, we've come close in the past.
What's the relation with Greg Harbaugh with the other Harbaughs?
There is none,
There is
unfortunately.
no relation.
There
Okay.
is, yeah.
Okay.
Harbaugh. It's not even pronounced the same,
Okay.
but
Okay.
but it's spelled the same. So obviously he gets that connection.
Okay.
He's from North Carolina, played quarterback, small colleges in North Carolina, has been with PJ dating back to his Western Michigan days. So he goes way back with PJ. But yeah, that's maybe the only connection to Michigan is the Western variety.
Okay. Okay. I know Minnesota's been hit hard with injuries in the backfield. What's the status of those guys? What's the running back situation?
Yeah, Darius Taylor, their electric junior running back, he came up lame with a hamstring injury at Northwestern State. Missed the Cal game. They had a bye week. Missed the Rutgers game. I'd imagine he's going to be out. Obviously, PJ is incredibly guarded about anything injury related. Any sort of question, any sort of angle that I try to present to try to get some information out of him when it comes to injuries usually results in you'll see that 2 hours before kickoff when the injury report comes out. He says that, I think, more often these days than row the boat.
It's fine. I understand why coaches are so reluctant to talk, competitive disadvantage, all that stuff. I
Yeah.
get it. But it's like it's not a state secret here. The other team's gonna figure it out or have
Yeah,
plans.
right. And the way I look at it is I think fans deserve to know if their best players are going to be in the game or not, right? I think there's a little bit of in this day and age of NIL and kind of where players are at, I think they deserve to kind of have a better understanding of who's out there.
Well, with betting legalized in most places now, and I don't get into that world at all, but
Yeah.
I understand why that information is coveted, put it that way, right? If you,
Yeah, no doubt. I totally understand the competitive perspective of it. And it's not just Darius Taylor that's out, AJ Turner, their transfer running back from Marshall, who was coming into this, who last year averaged 8 yards a carry. He's out for the season, so there's no doubt that he won't be a part of this game on Saturday. Femi Ijiboy, who's a redshirt freshman from Pennsylvania. He's been the kind of the number one running back. Him and Cam Davis, a transfer from Washington. Those are kind of the top two running backs. And I don't think that Darius Taylor is going to be back this week. I would be surprised if he is, and I think it's going to be Ijiboy and Davis probably splitting carries.
how would you describe them?
Yeah, I think Cam Davis is kind of a bigger bruising running back, and Ijiboy is maybe more shifty in space, a little bit more of an explosive type of running back. They've had a real tough time running the football, especially against Rutgers. They pretty much abandoned it in the second half and relied on Drake Lindsey to lead them to that victory. So they've got a lot of things to figure out. The right side of their offensive line really struggled against Rutgers. I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe some changes up front. But yeah, it's really going to come down to Drake Lindsey and his ability to pass them to try to keep them in the game.
A pretty balanced receiving core, right?
hmm Yeah, for sure. I think they've got a number of different that they believe in, a number of guys that have had big games and explosive plays. They've got a tight end in Jamison Gears that has caught a few touchdown passes. I talked about, Jalen Smith, who caught the long pass to kind of get them back in the game against Rutgers. Javon Tracy, a transfer from Miami of Ohio, an all MAC player last year. He's had some good plays as well. So they spread it out quite a bit. I think that's been key for them as well. Obviously, when you're asking a quarterback to go through reads at the line of scrimmage, he's also doing stuff post snap and working through progressions and trying to find the open man and finding himself working through that. I think at a pretty high level for a redshirt freshman.
How mobile is Drake Lindsey?
Mobile. I mean, he's a pro style quarterback. He's not going to, beat teams with his legs. He's been doing a nice job of moving the pocket at times, kind of creating a second play, but he's not a guy that's going to scramble for, a lot of first downs, and they don't run a lot of RPOs or anything like that, any sort of keepers. So he's been mobile enough, but he's not really a threat on the ground.
Okay. You mentioned the offensive line struggling. Obviously, Minnesota lost Philip Daniels to Ohio State.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight on that decision?
Yeah, I think, obviously when his cousin is Paris Johnson and he grows up in Cincinnati, the Buckeyes were always kind of a dream school for him, and
Right.
they weren't in on him early on, so Minnesota got an opportunity to bring him up here. He started as a redshirt freshman last year, for I think the second half of the year, especially. They really liked the prospects of him, but I think with an increased NIL offer with the Buckeyes and kind of being able to play for the home state school and where his cousin played, I think all of it kind of lined up for him. And obviously the Buckeyes needs that they had And then the offensive line, it all kind of came together and they kind of shrugged their shoulders over it, just kind of understanding the family legacy and growing up in Cincinnati.
What's funny is that Ethan Onyanwa from Rice came also, and most people, including me, thought he would be the transfer who started. Instead, Daniels beat out Onyanwa, and Austin Saravel's at left tackle, and most people thought that Onyanwa would be there. And so you have this guy that a lot of people thought would be a drafted guy if he'd come out last year, fairly high. Isn't even starting for Ohio State, so he's their sixth guy. But yeah, I'm sure Minnesota could use Philip Daniels this week, right?
Oh, yeah. They were hoping that he was going to be the left tackle of the future. Obviously, they had Ariante Ursary, who was a second round pick for the Houston Texans, and they thought, Philip Daniels could slide over to that spot and lock down that position for a number of years. But obviously, in the transfer portal NIL world, the Gophers have done a really good job in keeping a lot of players. Philip Daniels is really the only player of significance that they've lost in the transfer portal in the last 2 years. Obviously, Ethan Kelly-McManus left, but they were bringing in a transfer in Max Brosmer, who's now with the Vikings. So they've only lost essentially one player of significance in the last 2 seasons. And I think that goes back to kind of the culture and row the boat and those kinds of things that if they bring in a guy, they've been likely to keep them.
This is a little off topic, but I know Minnesota or Minneapolis, St. Paul, that the Twin Cities are a pro sports, town. I mean,
yeah,
the four big sports and all that. Where do the Golden Gophers fit in that kind of landscape?
Yeah, I think it's Vikings town
Right.
far and away, right? That's number one any time of the year, really. It's interesting because I think when you look at kind of engagement on our website, the Gopher football in particular does really, really well, right? So I think it has a place in the market, but it's just so crowded, right? I think the Timberwolves have a really good team that's made deep playoff runs. They're right up there. The Wild, obviously, this is the state of hockey. They just signed Kirill Kaprizov to the biggest contract in NHL
Right.
history. That's huge. The Twins have fallen on some really hard times. There's a lot of angry fans out there over what has happened with the fire sale at the trade deadline, but they usually have a really strong fan base. There's Minnesota United, the MLS team that I cover, that has their own niche. The Lynx have been obviously very good. Napisa Collier obviously made national news
Yeah.
yesterday, kind of
Saw that.
napalming the leadership of
Yeah,
the
I saw that.
NBA. So there's a ton of stuff going on in Minnesota all the time, but Gopher football has its spot in here, but it's like I said, it's very, very crowded.
Yeah, it's here obviously Columbus. We have the Blue Jackets and we have the
Yeah,
Columbus Crew, but Ohio State football is king without any question. There's just no
yeah,
question.
no doubt.
Now, if the Blue Jackets made a long run in the Stanley Cup playoffs, that would certainly get people's attention and people would go
Mhm.
crazy over that. But, I don't think anything can top Ohio State here.
Yeah,
Just the
yeah.
history and all that. So let me go back to the game and Minnesota's defense. How's it played this year?
Yeah. It's been okay at times. I think, it was interesting because they were the number one total defense going into the Rutgers game, which wasn't what it was like in
Yeah,
actuality with that Cal game. They've
yeah,
got a pretty nice young quarterback who carved them up in the first half of that game, but that didn't stop Greg Schiano from multiple times in his weekly press conference talking about the Gophers being the number one defense in the nation.
yeah.
Obviously, he was building them up quite a bit. They've been okay. I think Anthony Smith is the real difference maker. Their defensive end from Pennsylvania, who James Franklin and Penn State have tried to come after multiple times, but he stayed loyal to the Gophers. I think he has something like 16 tackles for loss in the last 11 games. He's been really, really good. He looks the part too. He looks like a guy who could be a top 60 pick. Danny Collins, I think today called him a game wrecker, and that's what he's been
Okay.
a lot of times. I think their linebacking play has been pretty good, pretty solid. And then obviously Coy Parrish and Kerry Brown, their two safeties, have been some difference makers. Maybe not so much this year for Coy. Obviously, last year he had 5 picks and was all Big Ten first team. And Ryan Day was up in his small town in northern Minnesota before the signing day a couple of years ago, but PJ Fleck was able to keep that huge recruiting win. Him and Kerry Brown kind of hold things in the back end.
Okay. What about the defensive line other than what you said?
Yeah, Devin Eastern, he's a guy who's on kind of the watch list for the Senior Bowl. He's a big defensive tackle. He's playing okay here this year. They probably wish they had some more depth along the defensive line. I think they've been okay up front, but nothing outside of Anthony Smith really circle on a scouting report.
Okay. So they are vulnerable in certain spots on defense, and I mean,
Yeah.
the cornerback. I mean, every team, every opponent for Ohio State has to have good cornerbacks. And
Yeah.
is that what's the case? Is that the
Yeah,
case for Minnesota?
yeah, they've had some young cornerbacks cutting their teeth, right? They've got Zaquan Bryan and Mike Gerald are two guys that are kind of playing for the first time. Gulp is essentially what that's going to look like, given what Ohio State has routinely had at the wideout position. They've got a transfer in John Nestor who's coming over from Iowa. He's played okay as well, but yeah, there were some issues that they had. Ethan Kaliakmanis, the former Gopher quarterback, some deep outs, especially early in the game, was a wide open spot that they were gashed with routinely early on in that game, and then they started to disguise some coverages and started to create some more pressure, and that helped out the back end. And so it was kind of, they were bleeding a lot early, and then they were kind of able to kind of stop it and get back in the game.
Okay. Well, how do you think this game might play out? I mean, Minnesota hasn't beaten Ohio State in 25 years, which is kind of hard
Yeah.
to believe. And I
Yeah.
think it's 13 games, something like that.
13 straight. Yeah.
Um, and Minnesota's a 24-point underdog. What would have to happen for Minnesota to pull
Yeah.
off an upset?
Yeah. I asked Greg Harbaugh that today, right? I was like, just given how big of an underdog you guys are in this game, do you feel like this is the type of kitchen sink type game where you have to go for it on fourth down multiple times? You have to run multiple trick plays. You have to do a whole bunch. You have to win the turnover margin by, two or three and
Right.
get something big in the return game. All of those kinds of things I feel like are necessary to kind of do that. And he said, we don't want to do things that are kind of outside of what we're accustomed to doing, right? But I think they've shown a ability and willingness to have trick plays at times. I think back to that Penn State game that Harbaugh mentioned early on this year. They ran a throwback to their left tackle. I mentioned Ariante Ursary at a critical point, and Abdul Carter, instead of rushing the quarterback, dropped into space and broke that play up. And so they were willing to do a trick play when it mattered in that Penn State game, and it didn't work out for him. And then it was Tyler Warren the other way, and the game was over. So I think it's going to have to be a kitchen sink type game, even if the offensive coordinator wouldn't agree with me today.
Well, Washington tried a fake field goal against Ohio State last week, and
Yeah.
Ohio State was prepared for it, and I don't think Washington was because the intended target never turned around for the ball. So kind of a bad
Oh,
combination.
man.
So
Yeah,
he threw it.
right.
I was like, "Where is he throwing it to?" Oh, the guy wasn't looking. And so there went that. So
Sure.
Ohio State knows that underdog teams, are going to try to. They got to do something, right?
For
Can't
sure.
just man up against Ohio State. And let me just ask you this general question. Ohio State's been considered an elite program for a long time. Obviously, we've
Yeah.
written about this so many times. They haven't had consecutive losing seasons in more than 100 years. It's always been Ohio State. Then you have, Michigan, Penn State, all, the elite programs. What is it about Ohio State, you think, that just makes them Ohio State?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. I think it's just the pull of the program, right? I think it's just like you said, just having the legacy of it, right? I think so. Here's an anecdote for you. Like my brother went to grad school at Ohio State for one semester, and life changed, and then he came back, and
Okay.
and he is a diehard Buckeyes fan to this day. Grew up in Minnesota. My dad went to the University of Minnesota. I went to UMD. He went to Minnesota Duluth as well, undergrad. But one semester in Columbus makes him a diehard Buckeyes fan for life. So, I mean, I think that's just the pull of it, right? He got sucked in. He was in the student section at the Horseshoe. He was just, raptured by it. And he's coming to the game. Him and my dad are flying in from Minnesota. It's going to be a little bit of a family weekend, a little bit of a work weekend, and
Yeah.
and he's going to be cheering for the Buckeyes, and my dad's going to be a Gopher fan. So it'll be interesting.
All right,
So I mean, that's just the pull of it, right? I think it
yeah,
just sucks people in.
and you probably give them crap about it, right? Like, how can you were there for 3 months? How can you be a diehard fan?
Yeah.
You grew up here.
Oh, exactly. For sure. 100% all the time. And he's relentless about it. So I think it just goes to show the pull of the school that, a guy from Minnesota who went there for a semester is into all the recruiting news, everything about the team, left and right and center.
Well, I grew up in Ohio, and I get it because I'm from here. My
Yeah.
parents met at Ohio State and all that stuff, so I get it. But it's always amazing to hear other people who didn't grow up in Ohio, but they just something about the program. First of all, the fact they're always good. People want to associate with a winner, right? That's one thing. It's identification.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Well, great. Well, Andy, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I always like coming to Columbus. I've always enjoyed visiting there. I remember the first time I was there in 2015. I think you guys were the Buckeyes were ranked number one at that time too. And I remember just being struck by the fact that every single seat was filled for that night game. And it was 20 minutes before the game and every seat was filled. I was just stunned by it. You talk about the pull of everything. That's a memory that I'll always have of just 100, whatever, 710,000 people in every seat 20
Yeah.
minutes before.
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, every time I go to the Horseshoe, I always kind of take a minute and think about what a special place that is, what a
Yeah.
cathedral, that place is. So,
Yeah, for
uh,
sure. I'm looking forward to the trip.
all right. What Andy Greder from the um, Pioneer Press in St. Paul, not the Star Tribune, that other horrible, terrible.
Oh, no, boo.
Boo, boo, boo. Andy, it was great to catch up with you again. Thanks so much for your insight.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
Let's see you Saturday.
Sounds good.